Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us.
A little reminder from interpreter. I'm hearing two different speakers introducing themselves. If you could say, "This is Megan, this is," just so that I can indicate who's speaking. And I'm going to move around my windows for one moment. Maybe I can see there's something blocking one of my windows right now. I apologize for that.
Okay, sounds good. This is Megan, by the way.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, all. This is Sarah. Um, it doesn't look like we have any other folks hanging out in the waiting room just now, so I think we're good to go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, good morning, folks. I am Megan Murray. I'm WCASA's evaluation coordinator. I'm going to be presenting first today, but Sarah just introduced herself. I'll go ahead and let Angie introduce themselves too.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angie. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a prevention coordinator here at WCASA, and I will be presenting later on during the presentation.
Just to remind you, last time in February, we connected and talked about image-based sexual abuse and sextortion and talked about digital citizenship and digital consent. Today, we're going to wrap up the prevention content, talking about media literacy, and then we're going to start talking about survivor advocacy, content removal, and suicide prevention. So, media literacy. Starting off here with the knowledge and skills that you need that folks need to understand and respond to media. Media literacy is not new in our work. You probably are doing something, or you may be already doing some work related to media literacy. Media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication, including digital communication. Media literacy education is about teaching people how to understand messages conveyed by media, assess their influence and their intent or their intended influence on us, and to have the skills to create and use media thoughtfully and responsibly. So the National Association for Media Literacy Education is really the expert in this area, and they describe this using these four subsets that you see here: critical media literacy, information literacy, digital literacy, and news literacy. All four of these subsets are relevant when we're talking about sexual violence and technology facilitated abuse. There's some overlap between these concepts as well. And as I mentioned, media literacy is not new in our work. And I know some folks in our state are already doing some. Does anyone want to share an example of how you teach media literacy in your work? You're welcome to unmute or share in the chat. I know we're just waking up. So I can share one. I know that we have some folks that Hope House in particular, I know used to do an activity like this, one of our member programs, that they would do song lyrics, that students would rewrite the song lyrics with positive social norms. They'd first do an activity where they'd recognize the harmful content within that, the messages that the original lyrics were sending, and then they'd flip those lyrics. So for today's conversation, we're going to focus on digital literacy. All four of these subsections will pop up a little bit as we're talking about it, because as I said, there's some overlap and all of them are present in the toolkit. But all of the resources focus back on that digital space. So we're really looking at how digital literacy intersects with everything else. As this graphic here shows, media literacy skills help us to understand and engage with the world. Media literacy helps us distinguish credible information from misinformation. It helps us to understand the impact of media messages and reflect on the impact of our own biases on our interpretation of that media. It helps us to be mindful and intentional about the way that we interpret and use media so that we can thoughtfully create and share media that aligns with the impact that we want to have on the world. This is a lot of text on a slide. I'll summarize some of it for you. Connecting this more directly to sexual violence and image-based sexual abuse, media literacy skills also help us to boost protective factors that are related to sexual violence. With regards to perpetration and victimization, youth with media literacy skills are less likely to perceive abusive dynamics and behavior as normal, whether that's their own behavior or someone else's, and they're more likely to choose safer alternatives to those behaviors. Media literacy also teaches online safety skills that help reduce vulnerability to exploitative and manipulative behavior as well. Youth can also learn critical evaluation skills from this that help them to recognize bias and misinformation, leading them to reject risky content quicker than youth that don't have media literacy skills. And media literacy skills also support youth in creating media that aligns with their values related to sexual violence. Media literacy can help youth to recognize those harmful beliefs within their self and resist engaging in aggressive behaviors online and in person. It helps youth to engage in and promote healthier expectations for consent, respect, and communication all around. So really, media literacy skills are so powerful, whether we're concerned about perpetration or victimization in our target audience. These skills really work on both ends of that spectrum. So next, I'd like to give you an overview of the resources in the media literacy section of our tool. This graphic here comes from Sarah Firth, and it's from a project by the Museum of Australian Democracy. It shows many of the things that go into media literacy, and I just think it's kind of a fun thing to let your brain travel around and explore all the different things related to media and how we communicate with one another. So first up, we have some resources in our tool for youth, providers, and families focused on teaching and understanding media bias and credibility. This focuses on fact-checking skills, assessing credibility of sources, recognizing potential bias in media,
For the
and it helps
interpreter,
us.
a request, if you could go just a hair slower, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Okay.
So as I said, this focuses on fact-checking skills, assessing credibility of sources, recognizing potential bias in media, and it helps us to make better choices when deciding what action to take in response to media. I'm going to share a quick video that I believe should have captions on. I will pause it right away. Oh, that was not what I wanted it to do. I'm going to make sure those captions are on. Did folks hear the sound on that?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and play.
We've talked about fake news. We've talked about media bias. What I want you to do is take the article that you brought today, and we're going to practice using the acronym CRAP.
My curriculum is very student-driven. I want to teach what they're interested in, and I want to help them understand those things so that they leave my room educated citizens. Every day in my class, the students have to come prepared with an article that interests them. So today, we talked about CRAP, which is our acronym for Spotting Fake News.
The first part of this is C.
CRAP stands for currency. When was the article written?
A lot of people in my age group are guilty of seeing something on Facebook and resharing an article. And when you check the publication date, you're like, that happened in the city 5 years ago.
Relevance. Does it relate to what I am seeing and hearing in the news?
Have you heard multiple sources or multiple websites talk about this? If you look up that the hurricane is coming, can you find that across multiple news sources?
Authority, dealing with the author and the publication it came from.
This is one of the biggest tips I can give you guys. Google who the author is. Are they credible? Or is Joe Schmo nowhere on the internet? And so who the heck is this author?
And then purpose. Is it entertaining? Is it to inform? Or is it to persuade?
Are you persuading? Are you just giving facts? Are you warning about the weather that's coming? Okay, and as we answer those questions, that's going to tell us, is our article reliable? Okay, so what I'd like you to do, I want you to take the article that you brought today, and I'd like you to fill this in. Okay,
especially with social media, it's so easy to find an article online and just share it to however many people. But if people don't take the time to notice the details, it can cause a lot of chaos.
I think we have a very polarized United States, and I think it's very easy to find articles or news sources that will support your theories on certain things. So that news is out there, but it's understanding the reliability of that source before we are quick to say that as a fact.
Thank you guys, have a good day. You too.
So that's just an example of one of the, and that activity, there's an article like breaking down what you're actually doing there and how to guide you through using the CRAP acronym to recognize fake news. I'm wondering if folks have any thoughts about how do you think that this connects to sexual violence and preventing crimes like sextortion and image-based sexual abuse? Where do these skills come in? Or even just relate? What if this makes you think of anything?
This is Sarah. We've got a couple things coming in the chat, Megan. So Michaela shared being able to assess and tell if images are real. Stephanie shared critical thinking and who you may actually be talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great examples. We'll talk more about the recognizing real and fake media later. That is definitely related to this one, but it's under another umbrella as well. But yeah, assessing credibility of sources isn't just news sources. It's also the source of the person that's messaging you. Is it possible that you're getting a Facebook message from the director of the FBI? Or is it more likely that the FBI would contact you a different way? Those kinds of things. Up next, we have sex and bodies in media. This is probably, for many of us, this is the area that we're already kind of comfortable talking to youth about media related to. So this is representations of, oh, and this is Megan again, apologies. This is where we talk about representations of sex, bodies, healthy sexuality, and sexual violence in media. Those representations impact and shape our understanding of these concepts, especially in youth that are just surrounded by these media messages as they're building their concepts of those things. Resources related to this in the toolkit focus on interpreting those messages, fact-checking, and sexual and reproductive health information. My personal favorite within it is porn literacy. No one wants to talk to youth about porn, really, but youth want to learn about sex, and without guidance, they turn to the internet. This leads to porn teaching them sex ed, and mainstream porn is a really bad sex ed teacher. It does not realistically represent sex at all. It's important for youth to understand that and to have the skills to recognize unhealthy behaviors and dynamics in that type of media in particular. Studies show that youth are often exposed to porn for the first time by the age of 11, so this conversation should come much sooner than many people think. The Gist, which I have highlighted here, is a really great resource as well. It's a guide intended for teens to learn about sexual health and sexuality in media, and it's medically accurate information organized into FAQs and quick articles. The only caveat is that it is from Australia, so they don't use the same measurements as us for like one of the questions that they have is how big is a normal penis? It's not in inches. So that there's a little translation there, conversion of measurement at least, but other than that, it's really great information. How do you think that these skills relate to preventing image-based sexual abuse and sextortion.
This is Angie. Can you repeat the question, Megan, for folks?
Oh, yeah. How do skills and an understanding of sex and how to interpret representations of sex, sexuality, and bodies in media relate to preventing image-based sexual abuse and sextortion? So one that immediately comes to mind for me is like the normalization of not practicing consent in pornography. Um, Understanding that that's not normal or how sex generally functions is a protective factor. It's also really important for youth to know that that they should tell a trusted adult if anyone shows them images or videos of naked people. We'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but child sexual abuse material and pornography in general are often used to groom children, particularly if child sexual abuse material production is a part of their abuse. They use that material to normalize sexual behaviors for children. And children may not be aware that this is inappropriate if you haven't had conversations about what porn is, and that no adult should be showing them videos or images of naked people. It's often initially presented as, oh, isn't this so silly? Or these people are having fun. So it can be important to make sure that children understand that the reason they feel uncomfortable with that is valid and that they should tell a trusted adult.
Megan, this is Sarah. We've got some another contribution in the chat, just reflecting on how the takeaway from porn might be that non-consensual sex or choking or other violent forms of intimacy are the norm and what everybody wants and is what everybody's is or should be doing or participating in.
Absolutely. So Angie spent some time on social media in our first session, so I won't spend too long here, but social media literacy is the application of media literacy to our social media. This focuses on understanding the role of algorithms, influencers, and advertising in the media that we consume on social media. So this includes understanding the gap between what we see on social media and real life, recognizing dangerous situations, and understanding the way social media impacts our thoughts and behaviors. How do you think that these skills relate to preventing image-based sexual abuse and sextortion? Why does it matter if we understand that the influencer is trying to sell us things?
This is Sarah. Got a couple things coming in the chat. So Natalie shared understanding it's a sale means you don't see it as a moral responsibility to imitate them. Great
Yeah,
point. Stephanie shared aware of what's realistic and what's not.
yeah, absolutely. And Angie spent a lot of time on the on this piece, but the managing your digital footprint and thinking about how you're influencing others is also really big here too. Thinking about the way that things that you see on social media impact you and how you can have impact on others by how you're engaging with them in healthy or unhealthy ways. And then last but not least, in this section, we also have some resources on artificial intelligence literacy. It's a new area of media literacy for many, and it is a little more expansive as the how media is created piece here gets a little more complicated. A lot of people are really concerned about AI use in youth. Um, and there are definitely some valid reasons for that, some of which connect directly to image-based sexual abuse, non-consensual image sharing, and sextortion. But avoiding exposing youth to AI doesn't and really doesn't help them avoid those risks. And in fact, it may make them more vulnerable to them, to some of its more dangerous elements. So AI literacy focuses on helping youth understand what AI is and how it works. On the academia end of things, the idea is that they believe that folks will make better choices related to AI. It's very much aligned with informed consent. People make better choices about AI use when they understand its impact, risks, and benefits. If youth understand why AI can't actually act as a therapist, why it's not capable of doing that, they're less likely to ask it to and less likely to take its responses seriously. It's difficult to get folks to really understand that, but that is what research is showing is our best bet at preventing the harm versus trying to say just don't use it. That doesn't seem to be effective in the same way that it's not effective when we're talking about sex, to say just don't do it. If they have no idea about the limits of AI, youth might make dangerous choices based on its responses. Regardless of your personal choices related to AI or your personal feelings related to AI, we now live in an AI-drenched world. It's beneficial to have skills in recognizing it and understanding it the way it is and understanding the way that it is programmed to respond. How do you think that these skills relate to preventing image-based sexual abuse and sextortion? Are folks familiar with the way that AI is used in scams like sextortion?
Hey Megan, I am not sure I am. Also, I was going to ask, could you recap what all you're putting under the umbrella of image-based sexual abuse from last time?
Yeah, I can scroll back to that initial slide. So really the words describe what it is. It's any form of sexual abuse using images. So it can be exposing youth to pornography. It could be upskirt photos, like voyeuristic photos taken without consent. Um,
So for the pornography part, it's specifically exposing youth to it and not pornography itself. Is that right? I think that was the point that I was confused on.
Yes, no, I'm not saying pornography itself is abusive. I'm saying
Okay.
that exposing youth to pornography is abusive or non-consensual, like taking images of folks without their consent or sharing images of folks without their
Sure.
consent. That's a good clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm not sure I am familiar with how AI is used in sextortion abuse.
So yeah, this little graphic here kind of breaks down the big ways that it's used. AI is often used so that the scammer can hide their identity, so that they can imitate someone's voice that you know, or a video of someone that you might know. They can, the example of like, would the FBI be reaching out to you over Facebook? They also might be using a voice impersonation to call you and pretend to be someone from law enforcement, as well as the really AI enhanced phishing is being used in a lot of different kinds of scams, including sextortion. So the skills that we talk about here a lot of the time are recognizing photos and videos and tells about voice impersonation, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide as well as things like understanding how AI works in terms of that it and this is more protective factors broadly for cyber-based abuse and risk factors related to mental health using AI. Understanding that AI is not giving you another opinion. AI is not an expert. It is programmed to respond to you with what you want, basically. So if you're asking it, should I do X? It's typically going to tell you yes, because it thinks you want to do it. You want it to validate your idea. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's really the part that I think is important for youth to understand that like AI is not giving you an unbiased second opinion. AI is trying to give you what it thinks you want to keep the conversation going. And we have we have a resource that we created around AI that one of the supplemental resources to it talks about really understanding how AI works and the things it can and can't do. And I think that's really helpful in this area as well. So now we're going to play a little game from this resource that comes from Britannica Education on recognizing the difference between AI and real images. On each slide, I'll ask you to guess which photo is AI, and you can share in the chat or come off mic if you'd like. Feel free to share the reasons that you think the image is AI, if anything specific that you notice looks off about it. And I pulled these out exactly as they are on this website. So if you wanted to use this with youth, it's as easy as screenshotting or just scrolling through it. And they have all the answers for you and everything. So you don't need to make yourself an expert in this before you can all learn together. So looking at these two images, which of these do you think is AI?
Hey, Megan, this is Angie. So far, there's kind of like a good mix between B and A. Michael's saying the one on the right, so B. Natalie's saying A, the back leg looks weird. Michaela's saying both.
I like the Michaela's thinking I have a trick question. I will say there are not trick questions. But they both do. I honestly, I feel like that's what makes this one hard is that like frogs are so wild looking that like you could believe that both of them are, which is actually one of the things that I came across is that sometimes folks that want to use a fake or want to fake you out with AI stuff will intentionally pick things that are known to be really vibrant and like unbelievable to see in person. Because one, a lot of people haven't seen those obscure animals or obscure places that they're choosing in person to know for sure. And two, things like AI's tendency to use intense colors doesn't feel like as much of a tell because you know that the frog is supposed to be intense colors, right? Um, so here we have AI using those more intense colors than are typically found in nature, which that's a bit trickier here, as I said. The pattern, complexity, and texture is the other tell here. AI has a way of just smoothing things out sometimes or simplifying a texture or pattern. Notice how the frog's pattern is much more complicated on the right. Um, it's that's very difficult for an AI model to do. So a lot of the time how we identify it is by looking for like it's easier to identify a real photo versus an AI one because with a real photo you can find something that AI can't do or that AI is very unlikely to be able to do. What about this one?
This is Angie again. So far, we've got A's, a lot of A's. Actually, all of A's.
Yeah, this one feels like a little bit more of a gimme. But I do feel like I see so many historical photo ones that I didn't want to not include it. I think this one is just a little bit easier for adults than youth. Most of us know that photographs from the Titanic don't look like that. Um, but the points here are really good to note, so I wanted to still include it. Photographs that are old should look old. Even if they're perfectly restored, photography technology would never have been able to take this picture in the time period that it is supposed to be from. The colors is the biggest giveaway, right? But the crests of the waves being still and not blurred from movement, that level of detail, the level of detail that we can see from such a far distance, all of these things were not possible in that time period. Questions like how many masts did the Titanic have is also something that we can fact check, and recognize that the AI that and recognize that this one is AI because that's not accurate. The Titanic had four, or had the one mast in the front, not the two. Sorry, I was looking at the chimneys. Um, Additionally, the light and shadow not lining up correctly is a really, really common AI mistake as well. What about this one? Which image do you think is AI?
This is Angie again. Pretty much A so far.
This is Megan again. I think this is the one most people know by now. AI is not very good at people. It's getting better at this, so it's no longer the mess of 80 teeth in one mouth and a bunch of extra fingers all over the place coming out of people's elbows and things like that um, help you know right away that something's off about the picture. But you'll still see things like we see here. Extra hands, limbs that disappear behind another person in ways that don't make sense, even for folks with disabilities, like a hand coming out way, way farther than a child's arm would be, that sort of thing. Um, and tools being held in ways that wouldn't work for operating them. That's one that I think AI is still pretty bad at, that we can still catch most of the time when it does it, is looking for your hand doesn't bend that way, or that is not how someone holds a pencil, or those scissors are backwards. Those kinds of things still happen quite a bit. I think this one is a better old picture example, and I've been seeing so many fake historical photos lately that I wanted to make sure to include it. So, which image here do you think is AI?
Right away, Michaela's like A. Most A, there's a 1B. Mostly A. Yep, mostly A.
This is Megan again. The signs are the big giveaway with this one, which I'm sure is what Michaela was so quickly responding to, because that's another one that I think a lot of folks are aware of at this point. AI will sometimes use text-like shapes that are not, in fact, words or even letters. The faces here also have an unusually smooth, symmetrical look that gives that uncanny valley type of look that just isn't quite right. And it also, again, wouldn't have been possible with technology for that to be in focus and other things to not be in this way. The blurred hair is also really noticeable. There's no reason that only her hair would be blurred in a real photograph from this time period. So that's another thing to look for, is unusual or unexplained blur in photos.
There's a funny, this is Angie. Sorry, there's a funny comment. Stephanie is like, also, they aren't holding the signs. They're kind of just floating in the air.
I didn't even notice that. You're right. They're just like pinned to them. Who does that with their who does that with their sign? Well, thanks for playing a little game with me, folks. As I'm sure you already are aware, AI is constantly getting better at this kind of thing, but there are still tells. There are certain things, and some of them are within here. Some of the ones in here, most AI doesn't do regularly anymore. But some of them, like the unusual blur, not understanding how humans hold and use tools, those sorts of things, continue to be pretty relevant. Um, I thought I had something in my notes about this, so I'll just add it verbally. Um, Another thing is with the audio, with the AI voice in impersonation software. A lot of the time, the tell with that is about their cadence and where they pause, it feeling a little unnatural. So slowing down when you get a call that is unexpected, particularly thinking about related to sextortion. Like if someone is threatening you over the phone for any reason, slowing down to think about, does it make sense that this person would be calling me? Does it sound like I'm talking to a real person? Um, all of those things can really help. And the giveaways are often things like you'll hear background noise when the person's talking, but it stops when they're not because they're playing something. They're playing a audio file of a voice. Um, and in videos, you can often look at the movement of objects and people. Um, there will be sort of a weird slow, then very fast, or moving in a way, again, like talking about the not understanding how humans or animals hold and use tools. There will be similar things like that with movement, not understanding how legs move, not understanding how a dog really runs, and things like a shadow not being there when someone jumps. Those sorts of things will also happen.
One moment, please, for the interpreter catching up. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so next, this is still Megan. Next, we're going to talk about survivor advocacy and content removal. I want us to all take a moment, take a little bit of a breath. This section gets a little rough for reasons that are familiar to us as advocates, but especially frustrating in this area. We know that our work can be difficult, and it tends to be especially difficult when institutions fail survivors regularly, and when there aren't a lot of successful answers for survivors. And unfortunately, when we're talking about the content removal side of things, this can be an especially difficult area of advocacy. So I want to start off talking about the extortion piece of sextortion primarily, or anything related to image-based sexual abuse that involves threats, harassment, and demands. We don't make a habit really of telling survivors what to do around here, but we don't do that because we know that survivors can and do make good choices for themselves, right? That said, image-based sexual abuse and sextortion can be really overwhelming. Survivors may be unsure what options they have or who could help them. And here we have some research-informed tips for survivors navigating sextortion, many of which are going to be relevant to other forms of image-based sexual abuse. So it's really important that survivors understand that that you should, and really that youth in general and people in general understand that you should not pay or otherwise comply with threats from someone that is extorting you for any reason. It may seem like giving a blackmailer what they're asking for will make them go away, but generally that's not the case. It's actually much more common for threats to escalate after initial demands are met. And so you want to remember that demands are not limited to just payment as well. Survivors have also reported doing things like sending additional images or getting back together with a former partner to try to make sextortion threats stop. And again, these things don't typically make the threats stop. They typically make abuse and threats escalate. The best approach here is to just stop responding to messages immediately when someone is threatening you or extorting you. Talk to someone that you trust. This could be a friend or family member, an advocate from your local sexual assault service provider, or you can reach out to a national helpline specific to image-based sexual abuse, which I'll share with you on the next slide. Assess your safety. Is a really important step here. Image-based sexual abuse often intersects with other forms of violence, such as stalking, intimate partner violence, and sex trafficking. Survivors should consider things like if they have received physical threats, if the perpetrator has threatened to post or distribute their address, or if they have reason to believe that the perpetrator may be tracking their movements. If you're concerned about your physical safety, you should contact your local SASP or local law enforcement. Preserving evidence is really important. We'll talk about this more later too, but it's important to save all communications and evidence of image-based sexual abuse before reporting content, requesting removal, or deleting anything. Regardless of what actions you're planning to take at this point in time, you should preserve all of the evidence in case you need it later. And we'll talk more about evidence preservation. You should always block people who are harassing you. Don't delete the messages from them or your profile, but you should block people anyone who's threatening or harassing you. This includes the blackmailer, but also anyone else who may be trying to connect with you because they saw non-consensual intimate images of you online. Report threatening messages, NDII, or the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, or any other abusive behavior that you receive online. You want to report all threatening messages received from the blackmailer, as well as any of the content that was shared, and any harassment that you receive from anyone. You have options to pursue content removal as well. We'll talk about those as we go. NDII and child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, is illegal to host online. So you have options for demanding its removal within civil and criminal law, but you may want to consider seeking support from an advocate or an attorney to help you navigate the options available to you. You also have those options to report to law enforcement. Again, if you choose to engage with law enforcement, you have the right to have a community-based advocate from a sexual assault service provider supporting you throughout that process. So we'll talk more about where you can report these crimes later on. But regardless of where you want to report, know that you have the option to have an advocate present with you, and you can always reach out to one of the service providers linked at the bottom of that page for survivors that are on this call right now. These are two specific helplines for image-based sexual abuse. CCRI is the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, and they have an image abuse helpline for adults. They can also help advocates that have questions as well. It's a free helpline for folks to get information and referral. They can't help with having images taken down. They wanted me to be very clear about that in the toolkit because survivors do call them expecting that they can help with that sometimes, but they can help point survivors in the right direction and help them navigate those systems to have them taken down, as well as help them find other sources of support. The other one that we have here is NCMEC Team Hope, which is from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that we shared a little bit about with you last time. They have a volunteer-based peer support helpline that it is entirely manned by volunteers to support parents, caretakers, and extended family members and adults who either were missing or exploited children, including victims of child sexual abuse material, or are supporting and caregivers to children who are missing or exploited children. Note that this one is a little more broad. It's more, it's about child sexual abuse and child abuse and exploitation more broadly. However, NCMEC has really taken a specific interest in child sexual abuse material, so that is a large part of their focus. So while it's a little broader, it's also still got a very specific focus and training within it. Another resource I want to highlight here for you, comes from Tech Safety Canada. This toolkit includes checklists and information for survivors and advocates to support safety planning and strategic technology use in the aftermath of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So that's broader than image-based sexual abuse. That includes technology-facilitated stalking, technology-facilitated intimate partner violence. It's a really great tool for advocates as well as survivors. It's super comprehensive and even has a supplement. It's from Canada, so it is developed with Canadian tribes in mind, but it has a supplement for First Nations and Indigenous communities that covers some additional concerns as well. So it's a really great tool. So by raise of hand, how many have worked with survivors of image-based sexual abuse, sextortion, or any type of technology-facilitated sexual abuse in the past? Using the raise your hand feature in Zoom or throwing an emoji in the chat.
So this is Angie. There's a couple raised hands. It's 4 now.
Wonderful. I'm glad we've got some folks with some experience in here. I was confident that this has come up for folks because we know it's prevalent, but I was also pretty sure that it wasn't going to have come up for absolutely everyone in the space. So whether or not you've had experience with working with these survivors, you've likely heard about them in the news and heard about these cases. Every survivor is different, and we know that. But many image-based sexual abuse survivors who seek help report that similar concerns or needs are their primary reason that they chose to reach out. From what you know about survivors and the dynamics of these crimes, what do you think most image-based sexual abuse survivors identify as their primary need or concern when they are seeking support?
This is Angie. Removing the images and not being able to pay the sextortion price or getting the image taken down.
Yeah. Much like when we're talking about really any other form of abuse or ongoing abuse, at least, the survivor often just wants the abuse to stop, right? So what they want is they want the harassment to stop and they want the images taken down. Is the thing that got them over the mountain of shame and self-blame and all of these difficult feelings that present barriers to survivors reaching out that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Content removal is often the thing that gets them to seek help, to realize that, okay, I really need to take care of this. It's not going to go away. And we will talk about all the options that exist for content removal, but it's not the beginning or the end of your role in supporting them. Like any other type of abuse, we follow the survivor's lead. But much like when survivors are initially very focused on reporting to law enforcement, content removal processes can be difficult, re-traumatizing, and often let survivors down. And even when they work as intended, survivors may find that content removal doesn't provide that sense of closure and healing that they're expecting. So it's important to make sure that survivors see that healing is not just content removal. A lot of the research about survivors that I'm going to share today comes from the Phoenix 11. They're a group of Canadian survivors of child sexual abuse material who were first brought together by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection and NCMEC in 2018. They've since formed a community working together to advocate for policy and systems change in Canada, and they create educational resources for survivors as well. Their website itself is really focused on Canadian systems, but they collaborated with NCMEC to release this resource on the right for an American audience. This guide was written with therapists and mental health professionals in mind, but much of the information in this guide can inform any role the role of any helping professional working with this population. While the Phoenix 11 are a small group of survivors, their words have really reached beyond their individual experiences. They've been meaningful and helpful for survivors of child sexual abuse material of many different demographics and with many different experiences. This resource primarily focuses on roadblocks and inadequate responses that these survivors received, and tips for providers on how to avoid falling into those pitfalls. And while this was developed with child sexual abuse material cases in mind, as you'll see as we talk through these tips, some of these tips are relevant to child sexual abuse cases more broadly, or image-based sexual abuse cases more broadly. So I'm going to start off with an oldie but a goodie. It's important that you keep your emotions in check with these cases. Experienced advocates know this, but also probably recognize that it can be more difficult in some cases than others. Technology-facilitated abuse, and in particular child sexual abuse material, can tend towards the harder end of the emotional boundaries spectrum. This tweet here is a joke, but I chose it really intentionally because it's a joke that is very real for survivors of image-based sexual abuse. Phoenix 11 shared that their therapists often reacted with shock or other very strong emotions, some even beginning to cry when they shared their experiences. They also shared that this made them concerned for their therapist's well-being, less willing to open up, and some found themselves supporting their therapist and feeling guilty that they shared information that was so upsetting to them. So while self-care is always important, we want to recognize that it's extra important with these cases, and having those emotional boundaries are extra important with these cases as well. We also recognize that self-care and emotional boundaries are harder with cases that involve youth, institutional failures, and complex trauma, all of which are pretty commonplace when we're talking about these cases. So just be aware that these cases are tough and be prepared to manage your emotions so that the survivor can get what they need out of your support. Another experience that may be common with other survivors you've served, finding the right words for what they've experienced can be very difficult for many survivors. This may be especially true when we're talking about non-contact offenses, as our culture is really quick to minimize those experiences as less traumatic or harmful. Building trust is also important with every survivor, but it may be even more difficult when working with image-based sexual abuse survivors. These survivors are often especially concerned that they will be judged or that they may get into trouble, especially among youth. Survivors are also more likely to report to friends than official channels, which highlights the importance of outreach and education for youth on help seeking. And here are a few more general tips for providers based off of what survivors said didn't work well for them with therapists that they went to. Survivors said that they received better support from providers who had a better understanding of their victimization. This requires an understanding of sexual violence, of the added complexities that technology bring into that, and in many cases, an understanding of child and youth development. The relationship between image-based sexual abuse and things like trafficking, stalking, and intimate partner violence may mean that you need to have to learn about those other areas of expertise as well. Caseload is important here. Having enough time to provide the support that the survivor needs is critical. We don't really ever want a survivor to feel bounced around or like they need to share details over and over again to remind us, but these survivors are particularly, or these survivors in particular need stability and individualized attention in their care in many cases. Many survivors reported that they had the best success with a team of providers, so setting our ego aside is important here. Some see multiple different therapists using different approaches and modalities to help towards different needs, and others reported that they often needed different things in different seasons of life. So the right advocate for them when they were going through the court system was not necessarily the right person to support them a year later when they were trying to deal with the fact that they didn't feel complete closure from the outcomes of the court case. And again, every survivor is different, but just keeping in mind that what a survivor might need in the moment might not be you, and that doesn't necessarily mean they won't need you later. It also doesn't necessarily mean that the support you provided wasn't good. It just means that they need a different thing now. Next, I'd like to discuss some concerns and needs that are common around among image-based sexual abuse survivors. I think this piece is huge for us because it highlights why we can't just say, I know about sexual violence, so I'm prepared to serve image-based sexual abuse and child sexual abuse material survivors. Some survivors reported that it just didn't sit right with them when the service provider they were working with talked about their abuse in the past tense, or when they wanted to focus on the context sexual violence that was pictured, or treated that as more of a priority than the media being spread online. For these survivors, this abuse is not a past event that they are trying to heal from. It's active abuse that they are trying to cope with and survive. So while the image is up, survivors know that strangers are viewing these images and using them for entertainment or gratification without their consent. They know that people they know may see these images without their consent. Even more difficult, some CSAM survivors reported that they had to wonder if and assume even that their images were likely being used to groom and abuse other children because they know that CSAM was used to groom them. So they're assuming that their perpetrator is out there using that, or another perpetrator is out there using their images and videos to groom other children. This fear and the fear of what might happen is present for these survivors, even if the image has been removed, in some cases, even if it has not been found online yet. This one's a bit multifaceted. Um, Many survivors have complicated emotions around sexuality in their bodies following sexual violence. But there are some unique ways that this shows up for image-based sexual abuse and child sexual abuse material survivors. Survivors of CSAM say or may have been told that their young undeveloped bodies were sexually desirable or otherwise been shown love and affection for their prepubescence. Body image issues may present or worsen in response to normal puberty, physical development, and aging. In some cases, healthy exploration and expression of one's sexuality may have been what was exploited, like when someone takes a picture for themselves and their phone is hacked. Having this kind of vulnerability exploited can make exploring and embracing one's sexuality feel really unsafe. Survivors may also feel like everyone in their community or the world has seen their nude body without their consent, making the nightmare of going to school in your underwear feel all too real. They walk around with the fear that everyone at school has seen them in their underwear and is picturing it when they walk into every room. This can be especially harmful for LGBTQ youth, as is evident by cases we see in the news in which teens end their lives to avoid their sexuality being exposed. And we know that queer youth are more likely um, to engage in sexting, to be engaging in online dating, because they're trying to find their community and they're trying to connect with youth like them that they might not have in their local community. So queer youth are especially vulnerable and may be especially harmed by this form of violence. Finally, for child sexual abuse material, as mentioned, sexuality may be especially complicated. Offenders have often used CSAM as a part of their grooming to normalize abuse. So think about it. In some cases, these youth are being exposed to child sexual abuse material before they've had any exposure to the concept of sex or sexuality. This can make it difficult for those survivors to label their experiences as abuse, to label healthy sexuality as healthy, and some experience discomfort and difficulty with expressing healthy sexuality throughout their lives. This is common among child sexual abuse survivors as well. Some survivors reported being nervous about becoming parents and fearful for the safety of children in general. Some worry that they will become they'll suddenly become abusive towards children because of a common oversimplification of research on child sexual abuse perpetrators. And others are hyper vigilant about violence against children in general and and feel the need to really or feel very anxious about the safety of children. This one's a little more specific to image-based sexual abuse and technology-facilitated abuse, but some survivors in general are also very concerned about surveillance. Survivors of image-based sexual abuse may be especially concerned about surveillance technology and cybersecurity. Many choose not to use social media or keep a very low profile in online spaces. And I want to point out that this isn't just paranoia. Survivors experience harassment from abusers and others who have seen abusive images of them online. Online harassment can be as harmful as in-person harassment and incredibly difficult to evade because people can just make fake accounts to continue harassing you. It can escalate into safety threats in real life very quickly as well. So survivors are not paranoid or overly hypervigilant for having heightened concerns here, but just naming that the heightened concerns are common. Another one that's specific to image-based sexual abuse, if a survivor is pursuing content removal or criminal accountability from their perpetrator, they will need to see or allow others to see the non-consensual intimate images or child sexual abuse material to some extent. Professionals and survivors agree that this is harmful to survivors' mental health. It can be re-traumatizing, and having images removed doesn't guarantee that they won't resurface. So this can be a cyclical process that can be really burdensome and exhausting for the survivor. Victim notification is intended to support the survivor in exercising choice, control, and consent, but it can also be re-traumatizing. Child sexual abuse material survivors have the right to be notified about new cases related to their images, but they also have the right to choose not to receive those notifications and to choose how they receive them if they want to. So survivors who choose to be notified every time one of these images appear in an investigation or court proceeding may find these notifications more overwhelming than expected. Throughout each case, multiple notifications may be received about each investigative and prosecutorial phase. Survivors whose images are distributed widely online may also receive notifications about multiple cases that are under prosecution at the same time. So reflecting on the question of notification just to yourself, or let's do it in the chat. Reflecting on the question of notification, how do you think receiving these notifications might impact survivors? Positive or negative?
Megan, this is Sarah. We've got Michaela sharing that it could be re-traumatizing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anxiety all the time, waiting for the next notification.
Yeah, especially when you think about the cases that are where we see in the news the ones that are being traded around, and there's a whole industry around child sexual abuse material that I imagine those survivors are being brought into many cases at the same time. Another thing that came up in the research around this is that it's re-traumatizing for the survivor, and it can increase their fear about how many people have seen the image, because it just reminds them that, oh, another person had it in another place. So it can increase the scope and scale of the trading, distribution, and possession of that abusive material throughout their lives. It inflates that in their head because they're being reminded about it when it's happening. On the positive end, though, I mean, some survivors really find this empowering. It allows them to be engaged. They have the right to be notified, and that's really important. So if survivors want to receive notifications, it's important that they are. If they don't want to, or they'd like to receive them in a way that's a little bit less invasive into their lives, that's also a very important right to protect. So this is kind of one of those things where you're just going to process with the survivor what works best for them, and it might change for them over time as well. While exposure to these images can be traumatic, some survivors may find themselves wanting to know more about the images. Whether it is because they were very young or because they were unconscious, intoxicated, or otherwise unable to form memories in the moment, some survivors don't know all of the details behind the abusive images of them. The feeling of not knowing can be very upsetting, and understandably, these survivors may want to learn more about what happened to them. For some survivors, learning more about the images may help them feel a sense of control and support their healing. Others may find it re-traumatizing, and some reported that they felt both of those things at the same time. Feelings and healing are complicated. Last but definitely not least, we have content removal. I'll be diving into this right after our break as it's its own section, but I can't describe survivor needs without at least naming this one. As we discussed, many survivors name content removal as their primary concern, at least initially. That said, it's not a magic bullet. We have options for content removal, but none of them are fully comprehensive at this point, and they can be re-traumatizing. We'll get into all of those options and all the nitty-gritty stuff in our next section. So right now we're going to take a break. I don't remember how long we said we were going to make the break.
For the interpreter, I did miss something. You said something could be re-traumatizing. I apologize. I don't have the benefit of my team person to be able to support me. So I apologize for interrupting. Just the last part of what you said.
No, sorry. And actually it was kind of repetitive. Just that content removal processes can be re-traumatizing.
And I think we said 5 minutes, if that
Okay.
still feels okay.
Yeah, 5 minutes is good.
Okay.
And thank you for letting us know that that you missed that. Sorry. Okay, so 5 minutes. We will come back at 10:14, right? I did the time change right? I am on East Coast time right now, so folks know.
Yes, 10:14.
East.
Everyone was able to do everything that you needed to be comfortable and prepared for the next chunk. We're going to go ahead and get started. So content removal, where many folks, I think, in the general public think that this conversation starts. Next, we're going to really dig in here. As we'll discuss, survivors have options for pursuing content removal using criminal and civil laws, as well as company policies. When I went into this project, I expected to find the best option for content removal, or at the very least, a first choice. But the reality is much more along the lines of finding what works for every case. Every option we are about to discuss has gaps and limitations that will make them less effective or unavailable for some survivors. They come together like a patchwork quilt, but there are definitely some holes that need to be stitched up to make sure survivors are covered by it. Some survivors may need to use different methods to have images removed from different places. The big buckets I'm going to talk about today is engaging with law enforcement, using company policy, and using copyright law. Before we get too far here, I have a bit of a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer, nor am I pretending to be. All of the content removal strategies that we're about to discuss are based on laws that are designed to be accessible to the general public without an attorney. But the terms of service agreements that we touched on in session 1 are also supposed to be something that the general public can understand. And we all know that their accessibility leaves a lot to be desired. So I learned a lot about these processes, enough to understand how survivors could request content removal without any outside support, and enough to understand that many would benefit from the help of an attorney or a very skilled legal advocate. But for some of these strategies, even a very skilled legal advocate is going to want to consult an attorney. I'll do my best to answer your questions based on my research, but in-depth questions about copyright law or things like that may be more appropriate for an attorney and one that focuses in that area of law. Ian helped me a bit with this, but we had a lot of conversations about and I'm not a copyright lawyer either, so I'm not necessarily an expert in this. So remember, and we're happy to help you, as well as let you know if that's something that really needs to go to someone more specialized. So feel free to reach out to us with questions, and check out that Civil Legal Needs of Survivors page on WCASA's website for more information if you are interested in working with an attorney or using these civil law options. It's really important that we set realistic expectations and help survivors process decisions about how they might choose to pursue content removal. As we go through these options, I want you to take note of how you might help a survivor understand their options and set reasonable expectations for content removal. We'll have a discussion about that later on a little bit. And we have some examples here of the types of things survivors might need to know about an option while making decisions. And they're things largely that come up in other places, right? Or with other forms of violence, they're just slightly different questions. Who might be involved and how is something that we always want to talk about when we're telling survivors about an option that they can access. What will they have to do and where can they get help with those things? What potential outcomes there might be. And specifically with the with non-consensual distribution of intimate images, how might those images be involved or used in the process? And of course, there's more to processing these decisions than that. Those are just 4 big buckets to maybe already be noodling on as we go through. So I want to start by explaining this new law. So this is a new law that is somewhat controversial, and it may increase options for survivors for content removal and offender accountability. It was passed with bipartisan support, which I think really shows how people at both ends of the political spectrum recognize the importance of this issue. There are some really big wins to celebrate here. While many states, including Wisconsin, have laws that already made non-consensual sharing of intimate and nude images illegal, advocates have been really wanting to see federal criminalization of this for a long time. This is a crime that crosses borders quite a bit, so having a federal law in place increases options for survivors. Also, the inclusion of AI-generated content is significant as that was a gap in protections before. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission is responsible for enforcement of this law. Survivors can contact the FTC about sextortion scams and platform non-compliance with removal requirements as well. Still, there are some reasons to be skeptical about this being the saving grace for survivors that its authors seem to think it will be. There is still some ambiguity in definitions and procedures, and there are some concerns about overreach in light of that ambiguity. It's unclear which platforms must comply. In some cases, there are questions about if it's even possible for certain platforms to comply based on how encryption technology works. And there's also concerns about how this might impact the landscape of the internet and user-generated media as a whole. At best, we should expect that the content removal side of this will be a bit messy as platforms are scrambling to put better protections and systems in place. I have started seeing some get rolled out, and they look pretty good. What I've seen so far from Google has a new feature for having things removed from search that seems to be a little bit more comprehensive and hopefully is faster. I didn't see a time promise in there, but they are required to meet this 48 hours thing within the next year. So I'm assuming that's what their new process is aiming to do. Long story short, content removal processes might look a lot different within the next year. And we'll keep you updated as those changes are implemented, as this law continues to be implemented. Excuse me. We'll also talk next about the current state of content removal, and I think you'll see why I'm a bit skeptical that anything is going to be one solution that's going to work for all the cases. I don't really think this is something that we'll solve with one law and one sweeping solution. Another important piece to remember here is the topic that brought us here, as far as this law and this toolkit, is financially motivated sextortion. Many of the perpetrators of financially motivated sextortion, when the person is doing it because they want money, not because they're trying to humiliate a former partner or a peer, many of those perpetrators are not within the United States. So, a bit of a reminder that there will still be survivors who may not be able to get justice and healing through U.S. law change. Even if the implementation of this turns out to be perfect, it's a bigger issue than just US laws. One piece that does go into effect right away from the Take It Down Act is the criminal accountability piece. Survivors of image-based sexual abuse and sextortion can report the crimes they have experienced to law enforcement and have a few options for doing so. Which option might be best for the survivor depends on a number of factors, including age and physical safety risk. The first option I want to highlight here is reporting to your local law enforcement. This is the best option for survivors who have concerns about physical safety. As I mentioned, one of our first steps should be assessing safety, and if there are physical safety concerns, it may be best for the survivor to connect with local law enforcement. Survivors reporting this way should know that the responding officer they filed the report with might not be specially trained in responding to these crimes. But the fact that you can physically walk into a building and ask for help makes it the fastest way to connect with safety for those at risk of serious physical harm. In many cases, your local law enforcement may be the one investigating as well, but the person taking your report won't necessarily be that person on their team with the specialized background. And we'll talk more about what I mean by that through these other two options. So the other two options allow survivors to connect directly to law enforcement that is specifically trained to respond to these crimes, but their response may not be as immediate. So the bottom one here from NCMEC is the cyber tip line. And that is the recommended method of reporting for victims of child sexual abuse material and other forms of child exploitation online. Note that this is only for minor victims. I'll explain a little more about where those tips go on the next slide, but it's important to note that this is only an option for minors, as I mentioned. While this may feel obvious when we're talking about reporting, it's important to understand that to make sure that survivors understand the difference between a tip line and a helpline. Even if they choose to submit anonymously, this tip will be referred to law enforcement. And if the tip pertains to an image of them, they may end up being contacted by law enforcement, and we'll talk more about that later too. Survivors can also report to the FBI directly using their Internet Crime Complaint Center. This might be the option you choose if you're an adult who would like to connect directly with specialized law enforcement and you aren't in immediate physical danger. It's also an option for youth to report there as well. Regardless of which reporting method you use, a survivor uses to report, the report should make it to the right place. If you report a crime to the FBI that should be investigated by your local law enforcement, they will pass that off and vice versa. Just like any other crime, you should help the survivor process the decision about whether or not they want to report and how they might want to do so. We have other WCASA resources and trainings related to systems advocacy about processing those decisions broadly. I do want to touch on a piece that is specific to image-based sexual abuse, though. Teens sharing intimate images with one another may be violating child sexual abuse material laws or other laws related to sharing nude images, even if the image was one that they took of themselves. You've probably heard about consensual teen sexting laws and sexting diversion programs that attempt to address the problem of non-consensual intimate image sharing between teens without well, really, the sexting diversion and consensual sexting diversion and sexting laws are focused on trying to address sexting between teens without serious charges. Excuse me, my notes were inaccurate there. But so we have those laws in some communities. Has anyone worked with a teen that was dealing with um, image-based sexual abuse or sextortion who was worried about getting in trouble for texting or for sexting, excuse me?
Hi, Megan. This is Angie. Caitlin is saying yes.
Yeah, it's a very real concern. Teens get the same information that we do. Um, if anyone wants to share a little about how they talked that through, feel free to share in the chat. Um, while there have been circumstances where youth have been threatened or charged with very serious crimes related to sharing nude images of themselves consensually, um, when we're talking about child sexual abuse material and sextortion, law enforcement should really be focused on the bigger fish. And they want to catch the person who's threatening the survivor or sharing someone else's images without their consent. Not to criminalize, they shouldn't be trying to criminalize the survivor for having taken a photo of themselves. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't still discuss this or that reporting always goes the way it is supposed to go. And if you're in a position that a survivor you're working with is being charged with a crime for any reason, please reach out to WCASA and we will do what we can to help you. But on the next slide, we'll talk about the efforts that have been made to help make sure that survivors receive a specialized response to these crimes. I really recommend having conversations with your local law enforcement as well about how they might handle these cases before the situation arises, so that you have a better understanding of how they might be handled in your community. The same way that you might talk with a medical provider about how they might handle a teen coming in for to have their body checked after some kind of assault that they don't want to report, so they don't want to say an exam, they just want reproductive health care, something like that. The same way you'd have a conversation with that healthcare provider about how would you handle this? How does this trigger a mandated report from your definition? That sort of conversation is the same kind that you'd have with local law enforcement about how they would handle a case like this. You give them the hypothetical and you talk that through, and that might help you determine the right way or the better way for survivors to report in your community. If your local law enforcement says, oh, we would absolutely charge them to the fullest extent of the law, then you might want to go through the cyber tip line or contact ICAC. As well as a reminder, if we're talking about serious physical safety concerns, processing that conversation with survivors as well, as far as we will support you in no matter what happens as a result of this, that kind of conversation. Assumptions and fears can prevent youth from seeking help. So we want to make sure that while youth are generally aware of these child sexual abuse material laws and that they can be used against them, they also may not completely understand them, and they may have tunnel vision on those consequences, not recognizing that real danger. So survivors should know that they can seek help or that they can feel safe seeking help. I can say with relative certainty that teen survivors experiencing sextortion should feel safe reporting to law enforcement across our state, thanks in large part to the efforts and work of Wisconsin Internet Crimes Against Children, or ICAC. ICAC consists of a network of affiliate jurisdictions across the state, as well as a state-level team at DOJ. All ICAC affiliates have specialized training in responding to ICAC cases. There should be a local affiliate in your area to investigate these crimes, but that isn't always the case because of turnover. So if the person that had the training has since left your jurisdiction and there's no one that's gone through the training since, in that event, the Department of Criminal Investigation would handle the investigation themselves. So it either goes to a specialized person at your local law enforcement or it goes to someone at the state that's specialized, as long as ICAC is involved, which is really, really great to know. Survivors working with law enforcement on ICAC cases can also have access to crime victim specialists to help them understand their rights and navigate the criminal justice system piece of these cases. These are system-based specialized specialists that collaborate with local SASPs. So advocates can also reach out to ICAC with questions about these cases as well.
If interpreter request, I apologize.
Sure.
Lots of acronyms. You said something about SASPs, and could you repeat that, please?
Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't explained what SASP. I think I said sexual assault service provider the first time and didn't tell you what the acronym was.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. But yeah, uh, so SASP is sexual assault service provider, and these system-based victim specialists collaborate with local service providers. So advocates at those local service providers, like all of you, can reach out to ICAC with questions about cases related to internet crimes against children as well. And they did say that they might be able to support advocates with questions about more general internet crimes, but it's not quite their wheelhouse, so it might be more of them. It might be referring to others, or it might be limited the support that they can provide around that. They don't provide the direct like victim specialist support working directly with a survivor to adult survivors. That's an important distinction. ICAC recommends that you report using the cyber tip line. This method can save survivors from unnecessary engagement with non-specialized law enforcement. Jurisdictions can get complicated with internet crimes, so the cyber tip line, being a national service, helps us make sure that tips reach the right place. So when a tip is received, it's sent to the appropriate state's ICAC office and then referred to the local affiliate to investigate. If survivors of ICAC cases are concerned about their immediate safety, they can report to both the cyber tip line and their local law enforcement if they'd like. This ensures that they can be in the protection of local law enforcement as soon as possible, while also making sure that they do get connected with that specialized law enforcement. So you can always report to multiple of these sources as well. It'll involve more contact with law enforcement, that sort of thing. But if a survivor is not getting help the same way that we talk about with like child sexual abuse, that if the first adult doesn't help you, they can report in multiple places. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's not the survivor's job to figure out who should be investigating the case or what the perpetrator should be charged with or any of that. They just need to know where to report, and a report to any of these places or a combination of them should make it to the right place. This is, again, one of those rare places I give a blanket recommendation to survivors. Regardless of what options that they are planning to pursue, survivors should preserve all evidence before reporting or requesting content removal. If they're engaging law enforcement, they can also help with evidence collection as well. If you're pursuing content removal through copyright law, you'll need to collect evidence to do so. That's probably the most labor-intensive of the options as far as collecting evidence. You may or may not need evidence collection for company policy methods, but depending on that method, it's worth collecting evidence anyways, because if content removal through company policy is granted, if it works, then the evidence that it was on the site in the first place is also removed when that content is removed. So evidence may still be needed if you were to decide later that you'd like to take other actions to hold perpetrators accountable. This might be because the picture shows up somewhere else, or it might be because other abuse or harassment from that perpetrator escalates, and you want to be able to show that this action was also a part of it. So we like to help survivors have as many options available to them as possible, and preserving evidence helps them to do that. This guide at the bottom here from Without My Consent is a really great place to start with content removal, and especially with evidence preservation. It's a little detailed in other places, and some of it's more focused on California, but the evidence preservation piece is so great. This org is now a part of Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. And so I don't think that they're making updates to this tool since that merger, but the information in this section is still relevant. And it's a very comprehensive overview of how to preserve evidence step by step. as well as giving you a template for how to organize your evidence. So this is one of those tools that can help if a survivor really wants to do this on their own. They are not interested in engaging with an attorney or law enforcement. Without my consent, it has really detailed information that's prepared by lawyers. Starting off with company policy approaches to content removal. Most major social media platforms, search engines, and porn sites have processes in place for reporting abusive content for removal. This involves using content moderation tools that many of us have probably engaged with to varying degrees of success and satisfaction, I'm sure. Platforms don't always get content moderation right, and they don't always respond quickly enough, and they don't always make the right call. Even more frustrating, every platform has its own procedures and policies, which can be confusing and laborious to navigate. There are a few different resources online on how to navigate these moderation tools to report abuse, but I really like this one linked here from NCMEC. It's very detailed, talks about a broad range of abuse that you may need to report, from messages online to non-consensual images being shared. And I'd really love to see this tool become obsolete when platforms update their policies, but for right now, it's very helpful. Hashing and matching can make the company policy approach faster and much easier to navigate. It essentially is a process by which you can navigate all of those company policies at once, with a little bit of a caveat. So these tools can search across multiple platforms, all of the platforms that they've partnered with, and they can search across for a media file without anyone ever seeing the image or sending it anywhere. It's amazing. They do this using a digital footprint known as a hash. Rather than having to go through dozens of sites to search for the media or having to navigate takedown procedures, these tools allow survivors to request removal from any site that the image is on. The tools have agreements in place with these participating platforms to have matching content removed. So anything that matches that same hash, that digital footprint. I want to compare and contrast these tools a little bit because there are some differences that are important to understand. First, I want to highlight the great things that they have in common in the middle. The media does not leave the survivor's device and no one will see the image in the process. Both of these tools have a pretty large reach. They partner with most, if not all, mainstream major social media platforms, messaging services, pornography sites, and search engines. They are also both free to use and only intended for use by survivors. Survivors can use the tools anonymously, and they save a lot of time and effort for the survivors who they work for. But let's talk through the differences and why one or both of these might not work for everyone. The big difference between these tools is related to age, and it actually creates a lot of the other differences too. Stop NCII can be used to search for images of adults, while Take It Down is for images that depict minors. Keep in mind, this isn't necessarily the age of the survivor when you're working with them, it's the age that they are in the image. Now, this changes some other things about how the tool works. Because of the laws about child sexual abuse material, any nude or sexual image of a person under the age of 18 is illegal to send from one device to another. So regardless of whether the survivor consented to any part of the creation or distribution, it is still illegal to possess, copy, download, or send these images to another person for any reason. The one exemption to that is sending images to law enforcement in the context of an investigation. For this reason, survivors can only use the Take It Down tool if they have access to the device the image was taken on, because sending it from one device to another is illegal. This is not an issue for survivors using Stop NCII, as it's not illegal to send images of adults with their consent. Again, the sending piece of this is just getting it on a device that you have access to. Submitting the images does not send them anywhere. Survivors who do have access to the device the media was created on can submit to the cyber tip line, but remember that the cyber tip line is a referral to law enforcement. Both of these tools, the hashing and matching tools, are not a direct referral to law enforcement. I also want to take a second to explain the relationship between Take It Down and the cyber tip line, because it's an important difference to understand in regards to anonymity, excuse me. So you'll notice that both NCII, Stop NCII and Take It Down can be used without providing contact information. So on its face, it seems like survivors could use these both without engaging law enforcement at all, right? Well, it's more of a maybe. It's a little more complicated than that. While the reports are anonymous, the image is not sent anywhere. If there's a match for the hash located, that match is referred to the cyber tip line and subsequently to the relevant law enforcement agency. So law enforcement will then try to identify the child in the images and locate that person to check on their safety and notify them that they were a victim of a crime. So while it's true that survivors can submit anonymously to Take It Down, if the service works as designed and locates a match for them, that match may be reported to law enforcement and may result in law enforcement contacting the survivor. This is something survivors should be made aware of when they're using this service, just so that they know that it's not necessarily a bad thing for it to be referred to law enforcement when we're talking about child sexual abuse material online, but they should know that that is potentially going to happen when they're using this service. And finally, the biggest limitation here that I see is that this technology can only search for exact copies of the image. If the image has been edited or even slightly cropped or resized, the new file has a different hash. So this means survivors must upload all versions of an image that they know exist in order to check for them. I think it's also really worth noting that if I learned this in the course of my research, the people who are doing crimes like these for financial motivations absolutely know this. Editing, resizing, and all of those things are all pretty cheap and quick to do. So I imagine that this might be less useful for certain cases where full-blown criminal enterprises are involved, like maybe the case when someone's a victim of sex trafficking, child sexual abuse material, and financially motivated sextortion. This is also relevant to Stop NCII's promise around deepfakes. It can detect an exact copy of a deepfake, but not an AI edited version of an image if you only have the original. So for
interpreter, I apologize. This is quite technical. Could you repeat that last sentence about deepfakes? Thank you.
Yeah. So Stop NCII can detect an exact copy of a deepfake, but not an AI edited version of an image or video if you only have the original image or video. From my understanding, this isn't something that the developers of these tools can work on. It's just a limitation of hashing and matching technology. So another thing about this one is that it relies heavily on those partnerships of those companies. And there are websites that host content that do not opt in, including some that exist explicitly for the purposes of trafficking legal goods, including child sexual abuse material and non-consensual intimate images. Another strategy that's used for content removal is copyright law, using the Digital Millennium Takedown Act, or DCMA takedown notice. The DCMA was intended to address copyright issues created by the internet. It's often discussed in terms of creative content and intellectual property, but it also applies to intimate images as well. When a person takes a photograph, they are considered its author and owner of copyright to that image. If someone else took the photo and that person is a supportive person for the survivor, maybe an ex-partner or a friend, they can complete a copyright assignment to transfer the copyright to the survivor as well. So if the survivor owns the copyright, whether that's transferred to them or they took the photo themselves, they can then request content removal using a DCMA takedown notice. A positive here is that this applies to sites without any kind of partnership or company policies being involved. So if someone posts non-consensual images on a website they created and host, they can still be held responsible for violating the DCMA. It could also be an option for a platform, or if a platform is refusing to take the image down through methods like reporting in their content moderation platforms. There are a couple drawbacks to this one, though. First of all, it is only going to be an option if you can claim copyright. So if the photo was taken by the perpetrator, this one's not going to be an option. It also makes a lot of work, which makes it sort of an option of, it also is a lot of work, excuse me, which makes it sort of an option of last resort for that reason. Another problem is that DCMA takedown notices don't always work. Companies are heavily incentivized to comply, but sometimes they don't. And if that happens, you'll need to consult a lawyer for next steps. The links here take you to more information on how to file those notices. And if you're pursuing content removal through any of these methods as a survivor on your own, or if you're supporting a survivor with content removal, the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative Safety Center is an excellent place to start. It provides an overview of content removal options and how to pursue them. And then we don't have time for the discussion. I need to pass things over to Angie. But I would love for you to reflect on these questions and noodle on these over the next day or two, thinking about how you can help survivors see a path to healing regardless of the outcomes of content removal, and how we can set realistic expectations for the outcomes of content removal processes. And with that, I'll pass it over to Angie.
Hello, everyone. All right, I know you were just given a lot of great information, so just hang in there with us for just a few moments more. For this last section, we will be talking about suicide and suicide prevention. I do want to make a note that we don't have time. This was never intended to be a complete intervention or prevention training, but it is still important to understand suicide intervention. Megan, if you could switch this slide. We're not going to have time for this, but I do want to just make a note, if we can just go to the next slide, that the reason we're here is it isn't uncommon. It isn't a huge shot in the dark to make a connection between sextortion and death by suicide. Highly recommend watching this video. It is just a super short video with the families of Landon and Braden, who both died by suicide after they were victimized by sexual extortion. Governor Evers signed a law just last year, Assembly Bill 201, which is now 2025 Wisconsin Act 48. In honor of the late Wausau area resident Braden Bone, who died by suicide earlier that year as a result of sexual extortion. What it does is the bill essentially creates further penalties for sexual extortion in Wisconsin, and it also modified to expand the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Crime Victim Compensation Program to include death by suicide or attempted suicide among the acts that may be compensated. So why do we need to talk about suicide prevention in this conversation about digital safety? Like I said, because the connections between sextortion and death by suicide aren't hard to see. The impacts of image-based sexual abuse are similar to the impacts of sexual violence that happens offline. Feelings of shame, feelings of isolation, humiliation, and fear are common. Feelings of isolation and shame might be more common, considering the tactics perpetrators use to target victims, especially among teenage boys. There's also just a fear of talking about suicide in general for a lot of different reasons. Some may be that we don't want to bring up this difficult conversation, that we think that by asking about suicide, we may be actually causing the person to act on their thoughts, and that we don't know how, and maybe just that we don't know how to talk to someone who is in crisis. We just need to be more open in general of our conversations of mental health just to begin with. So really, like, this could be a great time to really start now. There's a large amount of stigma and shame with some negative social norms around expressing feelings of sadness, hopelessness, overwhelm, fear, and pain. So again, this isn't a suicide intervention training, but I do want to mention briefly the signs to look for that may help you notice that someone is experiencing a crisis. So if you notice someone talking about wanting to die or talking about intense guilt or shame, or that they're a burden to others, if you hear someone sharing feelings of feeling empty or hopeless, that they're trapped or having no reason to live, they might be, you might notice someone being extremely sad or more anxious or agitated than normal, or even just full of rage. They might also be feeling unbearable emotional pain or physical pain. Also look for changing behavior, such as making a plan or researching ways to die. If you notice that your friend or someone that you love is withdrawing from your company and others' company, if they're saying goodbye or giving away important items or making a will, if you see them taking dangerous risks, such as driving extremely fast or downplaying extreme mood swings, you might notice someone eating more, sleeping less, sleeping more, that type of thing, or using alcohol or drugs more often. As we have mentioned in this training, the internet can be a great place to more easily find connections with others who have similar interests as you. But the internet can also be a lonely place. So that's why understanding these behavioral changes that may signal suicidal ideation is important. Because of the societal stigma and shame around talking about mental health and just having suicidal thoughts, people may be less likely to reach out for support. And then on the flip side of that, people may be less likely to reach out to someone who is needing support. And as I have talked about, we have this weird societal aversion to talking about suicide and mental health, like it is a super taboo subject. And it really doesn't have to be, nor should it be, a suicidal, having a conversation around suicide and mental health. It should not be a taboo subject. Talking about mental health should be absolutely done regularly, as much as we focus on our physical health. We need our focus on our mental health to be just as important. These graphics can explain how we can have the start of these conversations around mental health and suicide with young people or just people in our lives in general. As with most prevention education, talking about the subject should be done regularly and openly. When checking in with someone, we need to be asking directly about any suicidal thoughts. So again, some may think that just by asking about any suicidal ideation, it will then trigger an attempt, and that's just not true. But by avoiding any conversations on this, young people who are in our lives may erroneously think that they aren't able to talk to us about any concerns that they might be having. We don't know what we don't know, right? So the first step in really trying to get around that hesitation or fear about having this conversation is to understand what language we should be using when talking about suicide. We know that language and the words that we choose have a lot of power, whether we want them to or not. So the words that we use in these discussions can really help break the stigma and shame. So think about why the phrasing on these slides, why we might want to avoid phrasing these questions or phrasing these conversations as a successful suicide or failed suicide. What does that mean, right? What does that portray to someone when we use the words successful or failed? And think about, why might the phrase committing suicide be harmful? What is it about that word commit that just has some negative connotations around it? So again, choosing our words carefully will go a long way to help break that stigma around suicide and mental health. I have really been hopeful that this shift in language that I'm seeing is catching on. I'm really seeing more people and organizations and even news media use the phrase die by suicide more than commit suicide, which again, I'm super hopeful that just that start of shifting that language can be a good way to break the stigma around suicide and mental health. A few years ago, there was a national switch from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline phone number to the very simple 988 Lifeline. Anyone, anywhere can call or text 988 if they are in need of any mental health support and or experiencing suicidal thoughts. People can also use the website that is listed on the slide to chat with trained counselors. There's also a lot of culturally specific mental health and suicide support, so I wanted to make sure to list them on this slide. And the toolkit has a lot of resources that are listed in terms of learning more about suicidal ideation and intervention in general, but I wanted to highlight a few. This website has a lot of how do I talk to my child about various issues related to mental health and suicide, as well as information on how to prevent any risk factors. I really do love how this website in general has different talking points for different ages, as we should be talking about mental health and suicide in an age-appropriate way with every child. This is a great resource for teens to use when navigating their own mental health struggles, as well as information on how they can talk to their peers as well. And this tool is from our sister coalition, the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They created a curriculum for suicide prevention for youth in schools and community settings. So this toolkit provides information and a curriculum for facilitating suicide prevention workshops centered on crisis planning. And I will turn it over to Sarah.
I'm going to wrap up really quickly here so we have time for questions. This is just a reminder slide. Megan, if you want to go ahead and click 3 times so we can get those graphics up. We know that you're all here because you're concerned about what's happening to young people and vulnerable folks on the internet. We know that the information we've shared today can be overwhelming and frankly a bit frightening. So this is just some important reminders to everyone. This comes to us from Dr. Kat Horvat. I really appreciate that middle reminder there that you are not failing. This is hard, and it's okay to not have all the answers right away. Next slide, please. I highlighted the center graphic because that's really what I want to emphasize here, that you don't need to panic about how we are going to manage the ongoing and growing concerns about safety, well-being in digital spaces for young folks and for vulnerable folks, that we need to remember safety is not built through fear, right? It's built through trust. So young people and kids, vulnerable folks are the safest when they are heard, when they are believed, and when we stay calm and seek out the right information, the right resources. You're allowed to be learning this alongside with them. For the sake of time, we'll skip the short video clip there, but I believe everyone will have access to the slides who registered, so you'll have the chance to go back and watch it yourself. But just a reminder to breathe. We don't expect you to have all the answers right now, right away. It's okay to be learning and growing through this alongside the young people in your lives, and there are things that we can do to keep them and ourselves safe. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for attending. We'll pause now for questions, comments, feedback from folks.
While folks might be typing, I do want to point out that we are having Erica from Prevent Suicide Wisconsin present on suicide prevention during our SAM webinar series this month. So I did put that link in the chat if you would like to register. We're also having Carly from Vivint come and talk about harm reduction. So please feel free to register for one or both of the webinars this month for SAM, Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
We know it's a minute past 11, so if folks need to jump off and head off to another meeting or just return to your other tasks for the day, we're so grateful that you were able to join us. Could things in the chat be shared to us in the email? Absolutely, Andrea. Yeah, we'll make sure that resources, links, registrations, things that were shared in chat are also included in the recap. Absolutely.
On a funny note, I will also make sure to include the frog GIF or GIF or however it's pronounced, shared in the email as well.
And I'm sharing a flyer about one more webinar that we have this month with UW Population Health presenting about narratives related to sexual violence, because that definitely comes in here as well. Between talking about non-contact offenses and talking about, different motivations behind different forms of violence, all of that.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're so grateful for your participation and for showing up for this big project that the three of us are really proud of. It meant a lot to share it with you all.
Does anyone have any questions right away that you want to chat about? We can also, I don't know if we stopped the recording already. We can stop recording before questions if that's more comfortable.